on that extra dim projector that I had last time. And I appreciate Chris and Ben, I believe, that installed this wireless video adapter, which is tremendous. Same one I use at USN. It works fantastically on this really bright projector. I think it'll show it much better. So somebody said, what's the web page that I use for this? So this is the best free web page that I'm aware of. There are several really nice ones. This is called Bible Hub. You can just do BibleHub.com, or they have another link. It's just Biblos, BIBLOS.com. Either one will take you right here. And it's totally free. Now, yes, there are some really nice seminary level packages that cost boatloads of dollars that are a little bit better, but this is really pretty good, and it's free. And so we can you can see up here, you can select your book, select your chapter, select your Bible, NIV, NLT, ESV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are just a few that are available. So you could find your favorite Bible. Here's your verse. If you want to pop in and see what the Greek is, you can do that. If you're looking at the Old Testament, you can pop in and see what the Hebrew is. Sometimes that's helpful. And it's really, really nice. Biblos.com, BibleHub.com. And it's really, really handy. It's a good study tool if you are not going to spend a ton of dollars, like for a seminary package or something like that. So it's really, really good. So give that a try. And along these lines, you see on the screen that the one I pulled up is the same one from last week, the ESV. And so somebody said, is the ESV the best translation to use? I mean, oh my goodness, we need like a weekend workshop to talk about that, because the answer is no. We, in the English-speaking world, are tremendously blessed. There's a bunch of really excellent translations out there, and they're just really great. ESV is one of the more recent ones, and therefore it's adapted to the modern language a bit more, because languages change, English changes. You know, I always think when we were living in Southern California not that many years ago, it took me a while to adapt from Kentucky and St. Louis area to adapt to Southern California sort of surfer lingo. And it's different, even in the US at the same time period, but it's different. I had to adapt to the figures of speech and so forth. Now think about a whole language over hundreds, thousands of years. It changes dramatically. And so the ESV, therefore, is more recent than something like the King James Version, 1611, although it's been updated several times. Well, the language was the common language, maybe not common, but it was the language of kind of the church of the day, 1611. And therefore, it's kind of more Elizabethan wording and so forth, which we don't use today. And therefore, I have a lot of people that will tell me, oh, I just can't read the Bible. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And I say, well, what translation are you reading? Well, the Bible. Okay, that tells me it's probably King James Version, you know, the most famous Bible in the world, really. And it's an excellent translation. I've had several people say, oh, you don't like the King James. I go, no, I love the King James. It's beautiful. In fact, back in the day, when Prince James of Scotland became King James I of England, and he desired to use some of his power and money to make a Bible to replace the Geneva English Bible, which he wasn't too fond of, then he had the power and the ability and the influence to do so, and he did. And I've looked over his instructions that he gave to the translation team, one of the best bunch of scholars that existed in the day. And he told the translation team a few things. He said, okay, I'm the king, right? Yes, my liege, you are the king. All right. You know what? The Geneva Bible keeps using the word congregation. I don't want you to do that. I want you to use the word church, because that reinforces the organizational structure of the Church of England, in that case, of which the king is the head. And he did not like, as many of the religious leaders did not like, to use the word congregation, because that implies a dispersed group of people. No, the church is the organization. I'm the head of the church, the king, and therefore you guys, translation team, in my King James authorized version, you don't say congregation. When you see the Greek word ecclesia, which is we translate church. It basically means out of, like exit. Kaleo in Greek is the verb to call. So to call out of something into something else. So the congregation, the ecclesia. When you see that, though, King James translators, you say church.
But they didn't always do that.
Not every single time, yeah.
Like Acts 19 is a good example.
Although, if you look at the 1611 version, originally, some of those were that way, and then when it was updated several times, it was changed a little bit in spots.
They used because there needed to be a distinction in it. When the whole multitude, the whole big riot at Ephesus, when the whole multitude or the number rushed forward, both of those times was the ecclesia. But they couldn't translate the church because then it would seem like the church was rushing forward.
Yeah, and actually that was a word used in Greek culture of that day. Like if the mayor, let's use a modern word, the mayor of a city wanted to call all the citizens together of Sparta. And actually that was a word used in Greek culture of that day. Like if the mayor, let's use a modern word, the mayor of a city wanted to call all the citizens together.
Don't believe that guy.
And actually that was a word used in Greek culture. He's a few bricks shy of a full load, if you know what I mean. But like when the mayor of Sparta would call for the citizens together and talk about raising their taxes, it would be an ecclesia, a calling out. And the Christians kind of used that term, makes sense, and they kind of adopted it. And now in the Bible, we translate it church. So King James Version is fantastic. ESV more modern. American Standard is tremendous. Revised Standard is fantastic. The only ones that I try to discourage people from using are the translations that are done by one person, because now one person is making all the translation decisions. Like The Message, Eugene Peterson, Presbyterian minister, passed away now. Fantastic guy, very, very clever guy, devoted, dedicated. I occasionally do read passages out of The Message because his goal was to take this hard-to-understand Bible and convert it into the most modern phraseology possible. And so he took liberties here and there based on what he understood it to mean. Of course, how could you do anything else? So use it with caution, The Message, because one person. I like translation teams from many different disciplines, and that way they have to fight it out. And no one person can kind of take control over what they think the meaning is and translate it into English. Because once I translate something into English, I'm locking that meaning in English the way I think it is. And what do I know? I mean, I've translated several books in Hebrew, several books from the Greek, and it is incredibly hard. I have such high opinion of these translation teams now. And it's a very difficult science to do, because every word has a different range of meanings. Like you look in the dictionary, it's got definition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which meaning am I going to use? And that's the same with Greek words, Hebrew words. Well, if I'm already leaning this way in what I believe, I'm going to choose the one that supports me. But what if that's not really the best one based on the context and based on the flow of Scripture, etc.? Well, a translation team, somebody's going to raise their hand and say, excuse me, Professor so-and-so, I don't think that is right. And there have been occasions that I know of where the translation team will fight over one word for days until finally they have a vote, because they really can't come to a other conclusion, so they have a vote. Majority wins. Now, is the majority right? Maybe. But if translation team of one, majority is always going to win, right? One. Same thing with this new translation, the Passion. Simmons is the guy who is he's also a minister. It's also kind of a dynamic paraphrase where if his goal is, you know what, if I have to take some liberties and use different words, so be it. So be it. Okay, so anyway, that's a long answer for a very wonderful question. So the key best Bible translation is one that I think is from a team of translators. It's withstood the test of time. It's one that you will read and understand. Because in a way, think about this, and I need to think about this myself. This is an ESV. For some reason, it seems like every year, the print in this same physical Bible is getting a little bit smaller. I don't know why that is. But this is a message from your Father, your Heavenly Father, right? And my Heavenly Father. wow, I would really like to know what he wants me to know. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, I can barely put it down. Well, that's what I should say. Now, if it's a Tom Clancy novel, maybe I would say, whoa, that was so great. I couldn't put it down. You know, it was like midnight, and I thought, one more chapter. And then it was 12:30, and I said, oh, one more chapter. And it was 1 o'clock, I think I got to go to work tomorrow. That's the kind of stuff we should do with this message from our Father. Okay, Father, tell me, what do I need to know? And how can I apply this to my life today? Luke, what are you trying to tell me, brother? Paul, what are you trying to say? Now, yes, it is in an ancient culture. Sometimes it's hard to pull out. And if we add on top of that a very hard to read translation, it's kind of tough. So here's my short kind of, once again, kind of like a mini weekend workshop thing of this. If we had more time, I could give you examples and so forth. But there are 3 fundamental ways that groups translate the Bible. The first way is literal. The group gets together and they publish in the preface of their Bible, and you can read and see what the translation team's purpose was. Literal. They try to follow the original language as much as possible. You have to change the syntax a little bit, the word order, because English has a very distinctive word order. And if we could look at, something we all know, John 3:16 in Greek, and translate it exactly, and let me see if I can remember this. Exactly, here's what it would be. John 3:16, right? We all know this, for God so loved the world. Well, in Greek, exactly, word for word, not trying to change it into any English syntax or grammar rules, it would say, manner for he loved the God, the world. See, already, it's like not English. Well, it's not English, right? So we have to change it just a little bit. So, literal. King James, New King James, RSV, ASV, ESV, those are all very literal. Let that be your base, your favorite literal version. Now, the next category is dynamic, where the translation team says, look, we need to get the point across, the message across. So we're going to allow our team to modify the words a little bit if it's necessary to get the thought across. So if I have to use a more modern word, fine. And they'll tell you in the preface that's what they're doing. So as long as you know it, you're okay. Always read the preface of your version and see who is doing it, what their mission is. And the big dog in that group, the dynamic, is the NIV, by far. New International Version, whichever edition you like. The third category is paraphrase, where everything goes. The message, the passion. And if I need to, even add words, if I think it makes the message clearer, paraphrase, that's my mission. I do it. But the preface will tell you. So I suggest that all of us have one of each of those. A literal, that's your base. A good dynamic, like NIV. And then a decent paraphrase. My favorite is the New Living Translation paraphrase. But just remember, the middle one is kind of dangerous, the last one is very dangerous. Always use that to read after you read your basic literal, and then bounce back to the literal and see if it opened your eyes any. And if you think, yeah, that really explains this, and it's still true to the literal word, so therefore I've learned something from my NLT. Or you look at it and you go, no way, that NLT, that message, that Passion version, no, that doesn't even come close to the literal. So anyway, a couple of questions like that, long answer. The Bible Hub webpage is tremendous. Check it out. Play with it. It's really, really good. And ESV, is it the best? No. King James, New King James, American Standard Version, ESV, those are good, hardcore, literal, very good, big group of scholars put it together. Okay, now let's turn our attention to our real topic of the day, which is the gospel according to Luke. Remember last time I said the gospel, euangelion in Greek, it simply means good news. That's what it means. And we have taken this old, archaic English word from early English, Gott spell, good news. And we use it. Why don't we translate it into modern English? Good news. Great message. I don't know. We've just inherited this. Once you inherit something, especially in the Bible, it is really, 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 really hard to change. So sometimes I'll say the good news according to Luke, just to emphasize my point. But since all churchy people know what gospel means, I hope, good news, then that's okay. So last time we looked at Luke 23, which is the crucifixion itself, and I mentioned that there was no need to describe crucifixion to the people of the day. They have their culture, they know what crucifixion is, they've probably seen it dozens of times. First century BC, the Roman general Crassus crucified 6,000 slaves along the main road to Rome, just to show his point. And what a fantastic state-sponsored terrorism tool it was to keep everybody in line. Once you realized that's what these guys can do and will do to you if you mess with them, very powerful control mechanism. So there was no need for Luke to describe every single thing about crucifixion because the people knew. It went without saying. Luke records something unique to Luke. Most of the gospel writers record a thing or two here and there that are unique to their account. One of the most beautiful ones in Luke is when Jesus on the cross said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Only Luke records that. I often wonder, why didn't he tell us other things that we read in John? There was a reason, I think. Luke is trying to emphasize something in a certain way. John is trying to emphasize something in a certain way. And if we really look at the flow of the book, that one book, it often tells us something. Now, yes, it's good to pop out to other books and gather some more facts and do what we often call systematic theology, bring those facts back in and make a bigger picture. But we've got to be careful jumping outside the book, that one book, if we're trying to translate that one book. So Luke is beautiful the way he does this. So let's look at Luke 24. So English Standard Version on the screen. Now, this is how I would translate it, but is okay. Now on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they, Luke doesn't tell us who the they are yet, went to the tomb, taking spices. Now, any person of the day knows the common burial customs. They know exactly how this works. This is no surprise. It's fully expected. Take some spices to honor the dead person. And most often, women would do this. Frequently, men would do the burial customs for other men, but women could do the burial customs for women or men. And so this is very common. But when they went to the tomb, they found the stone rolled away. So they know, of course, the way the tradition was back in the day, you would hew into the fairly soft rock, kind of like a miniature cave, and then you would make a bench carved out of the cave. You would lay the body on there wrapped in cloth, kind of almost like an Egyptian mummy, almost, and had spices on it. You would let it stay there for about a year or so. After that, all the flesh was gone. Family would go back in, collect the bones, and put the bones in a bone box, an ossuary. And they would tuck that bone box in the back corner. And then you do this over and over again until that bone box was full, and you'd write on the side, this is Grandpa, Grandma, Sally, George, Fred, and Bob, because the bones don't take up much room. And then you keep using the ledge for fresh bodies. When that bone box is full, you make another bone box and put it back in, and you chisel on the side who is in this bone box. And so you'd have a family cave that was used over and over again. Notice Luke points out something very interesting. He said, this cave that Jesus had never been used before. It wasn't a borrowed family cave. It was unique. It was unique, never been used. So, of course, they're going to worry about this big rock, big round rock that's rolled in front of the opening of the cave to keep animals and miscreants out if they make grave robbers. Often make it kind of round, chisel it round, and there'd be like a little depression in front of the door so that big rock would and stick in the depression. It'd take 2 or 3 hefty guys to push it out of the way, roll it up so you could get in. So of course they're going to be worried. John tells us that they were worried about how on earth are we going to roll that stone out of the way, ladies, when they're traveling to the tomb. Luke omits that. When they got to the tomb, there was no body, and they were perplexed. That's probably the best English word translation I could think of, too. They had no clue. They had no idea. They were perplexed. They were stunned. There was no body. Now, some of the other Gospels tell us about talking to the attendant there and so forth, so that somebody has taken him. Tell me where you've taken him. That's not Luke, however. Luke is telling us this story, and I'm going to use that story as an abbreviation for the original word history. I'm going to take the HI out because I mean something that really happened to real people with real lives. And sometimes it's amazing if we think for a second, how would I feel if I was in that spot? Well, first you got to think, how would I think in that culture? And if you dig into some of the historical text, biblical and otherwise, you can kind of imagine maybe how you might feel if you'd been raised in that culture, maybe. So they were perplexed about this, and while they were perplexed, two men stood by them in flashing, dazzling, glistening apparel. Depending on what word in English I think best represents that Greek word. So dazzling, that's actually pretty good. Shockingly shiny, lightning-like. Sometimes in Greek they'll use a similar word for lightning flash. Dazzling in English is what the translator team for ESV said here. So these are clearly not regular folk, right? Dazzling, flashing like lightning. The ladies were scared to pieces. Now notice, Luke hasn't told us who these ladies are yet. He's setting the stage of the story. And after he sets the stage, only then is he going to tell us later who these ladies were. Some of the other gospel writers tell us who the ladies are first. Luke is going to wait on that. I think there's a reason for that. And so these two guys in dazzling clothes say to the ladies, "Why are you all looking for the living among the dead?" Wow, that's a powerful question. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? Remember, the force of this would be, don't you remember? It's kind of almost like a rhetorical question force, the way it's written. Remember how he told you while you guys were still way up in Galilee? Remember? He said, the Son of Man, that wonderful, beautiful figure of speech there, the Son of Man, must be given into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day arise. Don't you remember that? Well, I'm sure they're all stunned, right? Did they really grasp it at that time? The scriptures seem to indicate no. Did the 12 apostles, now 11 since Judas is gone, did they really understand? The scripture points to the idea, no, not really. Not really. We might say it hasn't sunk in yet. Not really. And I think, if I'd been there and seen all these miracles, I would have believed it. Yeah, I don't know so much. Because all this is totally contrary to their life's existence. All their life. Have they seen anybody been crucified and got up after 3 days? Of course not. So are they thinking maybe Jesus has been speaking figuratively to them? Or does he mean really get up out of the grave? I don't know. Are they confused? They're stunned. They're sad. They're brokenhearted. Because a number of them still believed, we know this from scriptural strong implications, that a number of them still believed that the Christ, that Greek word, Christos, which just means the anointed one. Christos. Sometimes I remember thinking, his first name is Jesus, his last name is Christ, like family name. No, Christos is a label in Greek. Now, it's the form that the Greeks would use instead of using Meshiach in Hebrew, the Messiah, the one who's been prophesied throughout the sweep of what we call the Old Testament, who's been prophesied over and over and over and over again, this Meshiach. But in Greek, we're not going to use that Hebrew word. We're going to use the Greek equivalent, the anointed one, the Christos, Christ in English. Don't you remember that? And they then remembered his words. Ah, you're right. Mary. That's right. You remember? Joanna. Yeah, I remember. I sure do. That is right. So they returned from the tomb. They told all these things to the 11, the 12 minus 1. Judas is gone. And then now Luke is going to tell us who these folks were. Mary of Magdala, little village on the upper west side of the Sea of Galilee, western edge. And I think I mentioned last time that two most common names for women, I actually did a little miniature study of this just out of curiosity. The most common by far, like if you have a group of ladies in first century, ancient Near East, Palestine, Judea, a third of the ladies are going to be named Mary. It was just so common. Miriam. We'd say Mary. So therefore, you need to attach a family name to every person so you know which Mary you're talking about. Now, who you talk about? Mary, daughter of somebody? Oh, okay. I see. Are you talking about the one from Magdala, village of Magdala? Oh, okay, I know who you're talking about now. Mary of Magdala. And also, here's another Mary that we're going to see. Mary, the mother of James. Another Mary. And then this lady, which in the ESV they translate Joanna. In Luke 8, same book, so now we know that same author is writing this stuff, so we look for consistency. We're not pulling another name out of some other book somewhere. Luke himself in 8 talks about Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who was a staff member of Herod's government. Herod, not Herod the Great. Herod the Great's dead, died in 4 BC. This would be northern area. This would be Herod Antipas. And so, is this the wife of Chuza, this member of parliament, as it were? Well, since it comes from Luke, Luke 8, my guess would be yes, but it's still conjecture. We don't know that for sure. And the other women. So there were other women. This is really interesting. Rabbi Jesus, teacher Jesus, when he was here, he allowed women to study. This was very unusual. You know, women don't study. No, it's the men that study. This is a very patriarchal society. You know? No. Men study Torah, not women. But no, Jesus said, yeah, come along. Disciples, following learners. That's all disciple means. Follow and learn, follow and learn. Hopefully, if you learn, you do. So he had both men and women. Now, in our culture, that doesn't mean a thing to us. We go, well, of course. I mean, look at our room. Of course we do. But back in these days in that culture, this was almost unheard of. Even today, in the Jewish, Arabic, that area of the world, we know that there are extreme cultural differences. Okay, women, you can't even go outside the house unless you're escorted by a family member male, brother, husband, father. Why? It's their culture, mostly. If you don't do that, you're in trouble. But Jesus took these ladies with him, and they were important parts of his entourage. And they were the ones that went to do the body, not the guys. Now, as I mentioned, men could do the burial customs and often did for other men, but they would not for women. And women could do both.
So the women toted the 75 pounds of spice?
Well, that was Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So heftier guys. Yeah, and there's another cultural thing we would never know, right? 75 pounds. Why did John mention that, John 19? Why? I mean, that seems like an abstract thing. No, we don't know it today, but in those days, if John had said to somebody, and you know what, my friends, he was buried with 75 pounds, 100 litra, 100 Roman pounds, 75 modern pounds of aloe and myrrh. And everybody in the room's mouth would have dropped open because they know that's super expensive and you never use more than maybe 5 pounds. 5 pounds. So when he said that, the people that know the custom, their jaw would have dropped open and they went, oh my word. That is extravagant. We've never heard of even a king being buried with that much spice. It's super expensive. They must really have been devoted to this teacher. And indeed they were. They went back to the apostles. They told these words, but these words seemed to them, as the ESV translation group says, an idle tale. What does somebody else have in a different version instead of idle tale? Nonsense? Okay. That's probably a little bit better translation, I think, in modern English. Anything else?
Most all of them render it idle tale.
Basically, the Greek word they're using here means completely unbelievable.
Fairy tale.
Oh, that's a good one too. Fairy tale, thank you. Yeah, like in modern Mississippi culture 2022, they thought it was just a big fairy tale. Well, but remember, these guys were brought up in Jewish culture of the day. They were all Jews. I remember it dawned on me some years ago that all the gospel writers, even Luke, I think, were Jews. Jesus said, I came to the Jews first. They were steeped in Jewish culture. All of them were. All the apostles, all the writers. Old Testament, of course, they were. Hebrew culture, ancient Hebrew culture. Of course they were steeped in this culture. And what did that culture teach them? Just like our culture today teaches us a lot of things that go without saying. Wonderful term, go without saying. Well, in a court of law, could women testify in the day back then? First century ancient Near East? Sorry. And here's my sort of Mississippi language take on that in that culture. Hey, that was their culture. It's kind of like, bless your heart. Yeah, your thought process is just so wobbly. We can't really understand where you're coming from. Well, what can I say? That was their culture. But what did Rabbi Jesus do, though? Did he say the same thing to the ladies? No, ladies, look, you might rub blisters on your little feet. Wait, feet. That's like plural, isn't it? On your little feet. So, bless your heart, just stay home. You can't come with us. He said, no, come on. I remember the beautiful story of Mary and Martha, sisters of Lazarus. Remember that wonderful story about Lazarus? And when they saw the rabbi coming, and I'll use that word because in their view, this was the great teacher. I don't think they really grasped the idea that he was indeed the Messiah yet. I don't think so. He was the rabbi, and he was addressed often as that we see even in Scripture. The great rabbi was coming. The two sisters, Mary and Martha, one of them rushed back in the kitchen to get the snacks and drinks and stuff, and one of them flopped down at the feet of the teacher and said, teach me. Do you recall which was which? Martha went to the kitchen. Mary stayed. And that was upsetting. I'd been a little bit upset. There's a bunch of work to do. There's guests in the house. So Martha comes out and goes, Mary! This is conjecture, right? But we know. She did say, Master, speaking to Jesus, tell her to come help me. And Jesus said, he used the double vocative here in the account, saying the name twice. Martha, Martha. Can you just imagine wagging your head? She has chosen the better part. This is the important stuff. Now, it makes sense to me. You want to help, bring out the drinks or something. I don't know. They thought it was an idle tale. But, verse 12, but Peter, impetuous Simon Peter, and his Greek name, Petros, Rocky. I think that's Jesus' nickname for him in the vernacular today. Rocky. Rocky. Why? Was he crusty? Was he like gnarly? Was he rough and abrasive? I don't know.
He was a fisherman.
Fisherman? Yeah, he probably was rough and gnarly and scarred and cut and sunburned. Rocky. And his Jewish name, Shimon, Simon, we would say, right? Petros, Peter, the rock. So, impetuous Peter, who whacked off one of the arresting people's ears that we read in another account. Right? Impetuous Peter, he couldn't stand it that it might be true, right? And so he dashed off to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves, and then he went home marveling, or ESV translators say, I would probably say astonished, amazed. It's kind of a positive term. So marveling, that's kind of a positive term too. A couple of translations say wondering. I wouldn't use that. That's more of a negative term. Amazed, in amazement. But notice Peter doesn't say a word. In fact, we won't, in the gospel accounts as we see them in the order that we're used to, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, we won't see a word uttered by Peter until about the last third of John. Luke seems like he's not a big Peter fan. He just states this fact and he lets it lie. Doesn't try to make him look good. Peter doesn't get to say anything in Luke's account. He was just marveling.
Well, I think, we got that word marvel there. That's you think about something that's akin to a marvel. What's it going to do now, right? We talk about a modern marvel. So if I show you this new little doodad right here, what's it going to do?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I think that's what Peter's doing is he's trying to think like, what's this going to mean now? You know, like I've got this evidence. What's this going to mean now?
I think this realization is starting to click in. It's not going to be solidified until they see the risen Jesus. Then it's going to be solidified. Now, then we have to kind of debate. Did it get solidified by some divine push that Jesus opened their minds to understand? Or did they just finally get it with all of the times he told them over and over and over? Like I say often, I think if I was there, I would have got it. Right? Oftentimes I think, hey, if I'd been one of those Israelites that got out of Egypt, whew, and I had seen the pillar of fire, as the King James translates that Hebrew phrase, and the great cloud, I would have believed forever. I don't think so, Give me a year or two and the memory's going to fade and I'm going to say, probably it was just probably I had like a bad pizza or something and just, indigestion. I imagined I saw that. We'll rationalize it 37 different ways. Now, the last part of Luke, we have this other thing that's totally unique to Luke. Totally unique to Luke. This epilogue kind of a thing, this road to Emmaus trip. It's amazing. I often wonder, why did Luke decide to add that to his account? There's got to be a reason. Got to be a reason. I have a few ideas. But let's look at this. It's a beautiful account. That very day, two of them, Luke doesn't specifically say the them who. Now, the most recent people were the 11, so we're going to assume it was some of those folks or some of the other disciples that were gathered. We know there was more than 11. Those are just the original 12 minus Judas. But the ladies were there. There were other disciples that were there. We know Jesus sent out 70 folks earlier. So there are other people around. So they went to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles, roughly, if you translate the Greek, from Jerusalem. 7 miles, that's like a 3-hour walk without spending, too much boot leather, 3 hours. So they were walking, and they were chatting with each other about all the stuff that had gone on. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself, that's an interesting phrase, Jesus himself, not just Jesus appeared, Jesus himself. It's a very emphatic thing, emphasis. It was Jesus himself. And so he drew near to them as they were walking along. But verse 16 says, but their eyes, and it literally says their eyes in the Greek, their eyes were prevented. They were kept from recognizing. Now, is that a divine concealment? Possibly. Is it that they were used to seeing Jesus in a beat up, scratched up, scarred up physical form? And now this resurrection body form, albeit still physical, it just looked too good. It looked too new. It looked too fresh. It looked too strong, too powerful, physically. Is that why they didn't recognize him? Difficult to know. I think the force of the phrase in Greek is a divine block for a purpose, a divine block. It's just what I think. And you can read commentaries, and there's a lot of different opinions about that, but that's the best I've got. And he said to them, what are you guys talking about? Now, that's kind of what the Message would say, the paraphrase, the super paraphrase version. And they stood still, and they were looking sad. Sad, that word there, I would go gloomy, discouraged, dejected, something like that. Sad, I think, is a little too mild. So they were looking sad, but we'll use it. One of them, Luke tells us his name, Cleopas. Cleopas. Don't know anything else about him. Now there's a Clopas mentioned elsewhere, but I don't think it's the same guy. So Cleopas, the masculine form of the same name that Cleopatra was named, the feminine form. So a lot of names are like that, masculine form, feminine form, and we don't really do that very much in modern English today. But Cleopas answered and said, are you the only person visiting all of Jerusalem that doesn't know what's been going on? And Jesus said to them, what? Now, by implication, things. What things? By implication. And they said to him, concerning Jesus the Nazarene, is how Luke puts it. Jesus of Nazarene. A man who was a prophet. Wait, wasn't he Messiah? A prophet? I mean, there's lots of prophets around. He was a prophet Mighty in the phrase here that Luke wrote in Greek, mighty in works and words. Ergon and logos, works and words. A good little phrase that just meant all over, right? Everything is consistent. Works and words. What he does, what he says. He was mighty before God and all the people in both his works and his words. But our chief priests and our rulers, boy, that's very true, delivered him to be condemned to death because the Romans wouldn't let anybody do capital punishment except Rome. They reserved that control over their client states, including Jerusalem area. Now, verse 21. But we had hoped. This is so telling, and it's so sad. No wonder they looked gloomy and sad and dejected. They were coming back from their teacher, the one they were following, and the Romans got him and they killed him in this most horrible way. Now they're going back to this little village, and they said, we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Classic idea of what the Messiah would do, all the way through Old Testament times. What's the Messiah going to do? Kick our enemies down, restore our country to glory and power, and we'll be proud of our country again. We'll be wearing hats that will say, make Israel great again, or something like that. I mean, seriously, that's what most of them thought. Now, there were a handful of people that said, well, I'm not so sure it's the physical angle. But that was the main thing. They had hoped that this guy was going to redeem Israel. Now,
There's
what...
a really interesting kind of word there with hope, though. And it's you get to see the biblical narrative of the word hope, and that there's, with the biblical narrative, just like Romans 8, in this hope we are saved. It's the hope with an expectation. So that's the word they use there, hope with an expectation. Not like, I was really hoping to catch some fish today.
Yeah.
There's a difference there.
We thought this was the deal.
We thought, we expected this to come to fruition.
Okay, so that was our second bell, right? Okay, just one quick thing then. Redeem. What do you guys have in your other versions instead of redeem that the English Standard Version guys used? Redeem is pretty common. What I would say for that same Greek word, but I have the luxury of, spending days on one word and deciding what I like is best, I would say set free is what I would say. And that's kind of what redeem means, doesn't it? Set free. In other words, kick out these slimy Romans that have took over our country in 63 BC, and now they think they're the big dogs, and they even have the audacity to appoint the high priest. These pagans, these Romans, they're like appointing the high priest. That's crazy. And they fire the high priest, which is what they did to Annas. They hired him, they fired him. They appointed Caiaphas, his son-in-law. And so they were sick and tired of this. There was a group of people that were called the Sicarii in Latin, who were like the zealots of Israel, and Sicari, knife. And so they were the knives. And what they would do, they said, okay, we're going to get rid of Rome ourselves. And they would wander around, and they would come up on a Roman official, make sure nobody's watching, and they'd take the knife and go up, and then they would merge back into the crowd. Roman official dead, right? Now then, they would call the 10th Legion out of the Antonia fortress next to the temple, and they'd round up a bunch of suspects, kill a bunch of people, and so forth. And so they were not the most wonderful people for other people to know because they're causing trouble. Okay, so we're going to stop today. We're totally out of time. Read the last part of that Road to Emmaus story and think as you do, and you might want to try reading a literal version and then pop out into maybe NIV dynamic and then pop out into a paraphrase, and always go back to your literal though, and see if you can kind of get a feel for why do you think Luke is telling us this? No other gospel tells us this. Why does Luke do it? What's the message for today? How can I use that today? What's it mean for me today? That's really what we want to know for everything, right? What's it mean for me today? It's very interesting. Next time, Lord willing, inshallah, I will tell you my 2 or 3 ideas. Just remember, they're my ideas, which means there's like a 50-50 chance that they're silly, and there's a 50-50 chance they're wrong, and so forth. Okay, hope you guys have a blessed day. Lord willing, we'll see you next Sunday, and then the week after that, Tom will be back.